Hey everyone, let's do history in a minute. To view the full 12-minute mini lesson, you can find me on Substack at Shannon McNamara or on YouTube at youtube.com/Shannon McNamara or on a Curious Compass podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And let's go. 1960s in America, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a long, costly, and divisive conflict that pitted the communist government of North Vietnam against South Vietnam and its principal ally, the USA. The conflict was intensified by the ongoing Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. More than 3 million people, including 58,000 Americans, were killed in the Vietnam War, and more than half of the dead were Vietnamese civilians. Opposition to the war in the United States bitterly divided Americans, even after President Richard Nixon ordered the withdrawal of U.S. forces in 1973. Communist forces ended the war by seizing control of South Vietnam in 1975, and the country was unified as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam the following year. By November 1967, the number of American troops in Vietnam was approaching 500,000, and U.S. casualties had reached over 15,000 killed and over 100,000 wounded. As the war stretched on, some soldiers came to mistrust the government's reasons for keeping them there, as well as Washington's repeated claims that the war was being won. The later years of the war saw increased physical and psychological deterioration among American soldiers, both volunteers and draftees, including drug use, PTSD, mutinies, and attacks by soldiers against officers and non-commissioned officers. Between July of 1966 and December of 1973, more than 503,000 U.S. military personnel deserted, and a robust anti-war movement among American forces spawned violent protests, killings, and mass incarcerations of personnel stationed in Vietnam as well as within the United States. Bombarded by horrific images of the war on their television, Americans on the home front turned against the war as well. In October of 1967, some 35,000 demonstrators staged a massive Vietnam War protest outside the Pentagon. Opponents of the war argued that civilians, not enemy combatants, were the primary victims and that the United States was supporting a corrupt dictatorship in Saigon. This is your History Minute.